So thank you for attending this Reproductive Justice Conference hosted by Institute for Ethics and Public Life here at SUNY Plattsburgh in the United States, State of New York Public University System. My name is John McMahon. I am an assistant professor of political science here at the State University of New York at Plattsburgh, and I am very thrilled to be joined today and to be able to introduce Stephen Kennedy. Before I introduce Stephen, I add a few reminders. All of the sessions from all of the different tracks will be available in the Zoom events page for the conference after the event. I believe they will upload overnight US time. Secondly, if you have questions during Stephen's presentation, please feel free to type them into the Q&A section on Zoom. And when Stephen's done, I believe that he is ready to answer whatever questions you all may have. So as I said, I'm very happy to welcome Stephen Kennedy to the conference. Stephen has lived experience of birth trauma and postnatal depression following the birth of his son in 2017. After extensive research in an attempt to understand his own struggles, Stephen concluded that most expectant fathers are not adequately prepared for supporting childbirth, even though 95% of dads are placed in a critical birth support role. He reads, watches, and listens to everything he can get his hands on about the topic of men and birth. And since 2019, Stephen has been developing groundbreaking resources that help define the role of fathers in perinatal health. Stephen has been published in the Australian Midwifery News and has been featured in Health Times Magazine and Australia Men's Health Forum. He's conducted webinars for the Australian College of Midwives, PANDA, the Fathering Project, the Australian Doula College, and the Brisbane Women's Hospital following his research on the untapped value of fathers in maternity care. He's also presented at the Marce Society, CAPEA, and is presenting at another conference in Australia later today. So Stephen is also involved in the Prepare Foundation. And with that, Stephen, I would like to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, John. I probably should shorten that that introduction, but thanks for the invitation. And I'll just kick off with a few slides here. Essentially, I call this presentation I'm about to conduct, the sleeping giants. Can we call men the sleeping giants of maternity care? And by that, what I mean is, are they an untapped resource that could in the future be leveraged to make some changes, to make some positive change to the way that maternity care and perinatal care is currently being conducted in Western democracies and in some other places around the world. I'm coming to you today from Melbourne, which is known as Naarm, to the local Aboriginal people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Kulin Nation. This was the first photograph I took of my son in 2017. He was born with an APGAR of 1 and needed resuscitation and was in special care for a little while. Quite soon he actually looked like this, so no problem going forward. He was a full-term baby, but he recovered quite quickly, and I feel that I didn't, and I was left with a significant birth trauma, and I had consequent postnatal depression following his birth, and I looked back on it and I kind of thought, could I have been better prepared? What was out there for me that I could have seen and done to be better prepared? And I started researching the concept of men at birth and looking at, what kind of impact it can have on men. What I found was a picture that was pretty grim. Men weren't necessarily having a great experience of childbirth, and also there wasn't a lot of resources for men to be prepared for that transition to fatherhood. So I continued to do a lot of research, and then I thought to myself, I've got all this information. I have a bit of an entrepreneurial background, and I thought, well, with all this loaded with this information and the need for some kind of change to the crisis that we find ourselves in when it comes to maternity care, I undertook to start a foundation, and it's called the Prepare Foundation, which incidentally stands for Perinatal Relationship Education. and paternal advocacy, research and engagement. And they're the kind of things that the foundation will be doing over the coming years. So just a quick outline of what we're talking about here. I guess there's limitations on my work around the heteronormative, heterosexual kind of paternal breadwinner type of thing. There's also limitations where I don't profess to speak on behalf of the culturally and linguistically diverse cultures, and also the LGBTIQ+. I can't really feel that I can speak for those communities. So when the time comes that people come forward from those communities and say, we'd like you to look at some of this, then I would gladly hand over my intellectual property to those families, because I believe that they need the same, kind of input that fathers need. But when it comes to birth support, which is predominantly what I'm talking about today, the principles of birth support are universal. I have a limited understanding of all of you watching this. Many of the challenges that I talk about here today are also experienced by mothers, but I guess my kind of remit was to talk about dads, but that's not at the expense of mothers. And again, engaging fathers in this space is meant to support. It's actually about giving them better ideas on how to support their own families and themselves throughout the perinatal period. And it doesn't come at the expense of mothers. In fact, it actually serves mothers and babies to engage fathers. And most of what I talk about is kind of around the first time father aspect, because I believe that once you've actually seen childbirth, once you've experienced it, then that you've crossed a certain threshold, a rite of passage. And it's the first time, guys, that I think where is the work really needs to be done, so that as I'll show later, we can kind of reduce some risk. And I do also recognize that we're probably talking generations. I talk aspirationally. I'm a bit of a dreamer. I like to think of the ways that we could possibly, the impacts of this work, but I do recognize that it's going to take time. We're changing thousands of years of culture here, and that ain't going to happen tomorrow. So with that said, the track summary of this, for this session was that, we wanted to talk about the importance of fathers and partners to a healthy pregnancy and childbirth, and discuss how men feel about their, lack of support and how they feel left out. So I'd like to break that down into two sections. So we'll start with the importance, and then we'll talk about how men might feel about, their impact and their attendance at birth. And then I wanted to actually, show a bit of light at the end that talks about what we can do about it. So this audience will be well familiar with this kind of, this kind of slide where the worldwide research, anecdotal evidence, clearly there's a crisis in the way that babies are being brought into the world in 2022, which is quite surprising when you think of all the ways we've advanced in all other avenues of human development. The one that we kind of seem to be stagnant on is one that's almost the most important. So there's certain issues with the way that maternity care is currently kind of undertaken across the world. So I'll take us back to 80 years ago, when Grant Dick Reed wrote a book called Childbirth Without Fear. And obviously people in the audience will also be familiar with this. Now, he said in that book that the totally unprepared man has no place at the birth of his child. Now, Grant Dick Reed was one of the first to write about what he termed the fear, tension, pain cycle. And he recognized that fathers in the space could bring their fear with them, and that could actually impose the fear tension cycle upon the labouring woman. And more recently, we've had Michel O'Don, who's a legend in this field, and he believes that men should not be in the room as well. And the reason for this is, as medicalisation of birth occurred, we actually brought dads into the room for the first time, but we didn't tell them what to expect. And we didn't tell them, just how primal childbirth can appear. And so the bringing fathers into the room has actually increased the risk to mothers and babies, because we're bringing in someone who their primal protector role, it's triggered when they see their partner in what their brain can't distinguish between danger and functional pain. So unfortunately, I believe that unprepared fathers do actually have an impact on the way that birth is occurring, and it's a negative impact if they're unprepared, because they can bring that fear in and infect the space with their adrenaline. So let's go to the first part, the importance of fathers, to a healthy pregnancy and birth. And it exists on a spectrum. Like a lot of things in human endeavor, there is one end of the spectrum and then there's the other. And so when it comes to pregnancy, it's about engagement. And what is that engagement spectrum? Well, at one end of that spectrum, we've got guys who are disinterested, who think that they don't have a role during pregnancy. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have men that constantly have the question on their lips, is there anything I can do for you right now? Which is the place we need to be. That's the best kind of possible place for men and partners to be, where he's just ready to do everything during pregnancy that needs to be done. And that allows that pregnant person to be really confident about their future together and just put a lot of energy into the child. And I think that's the best part of that spectrum. A little bit more about some pregnancy support. It'd be great if he's interested and engaged, so that he can be involved in the decision making. It's also good that he recognises that pregnancy is it's the most energetically expensive activity known to man. Researchers at Duke University did a study where they actually looked at Tour de France athletes and transcontinental marathon runners, and then they looked at pregnant women, and they concluded that it's actually the most energetically expensive activity that can happen to a human body. So fathers need to understand that and really, become, recognize that that's actually that's a thing. Matrescence and identity shift. Men don't really understand matrescence, that there is going to be a change, that their partner is going to go from me to we, and that's nature. It's not her. There's going to be an identity shift. He's going to have an identity shift as well, to a lesser degree. I also like to tell guys that during pregnancy, it's kind of a good idea if you tried not to fix everything. If your partner comes to you with some issues or problems, sometimes it's best just to listen and not necessarily always try and provide a dynamic solution. It's also good if you connect with the unborn child. I mean, that's when the best outcomes, can begin to happen, because that's when the changes in his own hormonal landscape will begin to take place. And he has to be patient, calm, supportive, and loving. And I like to say that, the best kind of outcomes are when fathers treat their partner like it's Mother's Day every single day. And incidentally, it's Mother's Day on Sunday here in Australia. So happy Mother's Day to all the Australian mums coming up on Sunday. So he also needs to recognise that what I call the pregnancy energy exchange. In fact, this could be called the perinatal energy exchange. We know that the baby receives all of its energy, all of its nutrients, all of its blood, hormones, everything to grow directly from the mother. So if we can say to fathers, if you help the pregnant person conserve energy, then incidentally, you're kind of giving that to your baby. So if we say to fathers, you can help the growth and development of your baby during pregnancy, and this is your role, then maybe they'll begin to understand that they need to help the expectant mother conserve energy, so that energy can go into the baby. And this is a good way of actually saying to men, get involved, do more housework, try and help her conserve energy. It's a good way of saying it, because men love the idea of knowing that they're helping the growth and development of their baby, because they can see the kind of outcomes they're having by helping the mother, but they don't really connect with the idea of being able to help the baby because they feel disconnected from that. So if we can begin to get them kind of having a connection with the unborn child early, and also recognizing that they do have a role and that it's, that they can help with the energy exchange, then, maybe we'll move forward in a sense. So then moving to the birth engagement spectrum, at one end of this, unfortunately, some men in the room can be a dangerous hindrance. They can be the difference between a emergency cesarean and a wonderfully normal physiological birth. At the other end, we've got men who can, hold that energy, be in the space, remain calm, and provide continuous and significant birth and family support. And so at the one end of that scale down, the worst kind of possible end is when they bring in their fear, their adrenaline into the room, and they cause muscle tensing and tightening, and they actually make medical intervention more likely. And then those who are able to understand that in fact, birth is all about love. It's all about oxytocin. And, if he can remain calm and recognize that it's a loving space, and if he can hold that loving energy towards his partner, then her oxytocin will be much more likely to flow. Labor will progress naturally and normally, and intervention would be less likely. So I kind of call that their secret handbrake and their secret weapon. The handbrake being adrenaline, which will slow and perhaps stop labor, and their secret weapon, oxytocin. And they actually, the way I like to explain this to guys is you've got a tap. You've got a tap of oxytocin because you know how to press your partner's buttons. And, there's a few things that he can also recognize during birth. I'm just getting a little distracted with the chat there. So we also have to, let men, this is a very basic kind of aspect of childbirth that men just don't get. They haven't been told this kind of stuff. And I think that that's a real oversight. It's really unfortunate for men and for birth that they're not really cognizant of the idea that there will be a hormonal haze or labor land, that the brain waves will change. And, we have to let men know that this is a really good sign. When your partner is disappearing into a trance, then you should celebrate, but not outwardly. You should celebrate inwardly. And in fact, the best outcomes can be had when the father reduces his brain waves as well into a more trance-like state, goes there with her, so to speak. Because we can't have men kind of asking questions that require an answer when someone's in deep labor. It's just really fundamentally wrong, and men just don't get that. And we need to tell them that. It's fundamental, and it really is a really easy one to tell them. So we need to have men who can facilitate that surrender and calmly monitor their partner, because they know her the best. They will be able to see little aspects of her changing in consciousness or her uncomfortable, if she begins to become uncomfortable, or if there's something going on for her, they will be the first ones in that room to pick that up. So if they are given the right kind of information on how to monitor, their partner, then the birth outcomes will be revolutionized, is the way I think. So let's now move into part 2, where we talk about a little bit about, how do men feel about this lack of support? Or, when you look at this as an actual statement, I don't think men actually know about the lack of support. They kind of don't really expect it, because they think this is still very much in the women's space. The only people who really don't understand how much they need this are first-time fathers, unfortunately. Mothers know they need it, obstetricians, your midwives, doulas, everyone who is in the birth space knows that a really well-connected dad is fundamental to how important is very important, and they're the only ones that are still yet to be convinced. So that's what a lot of my work is actually about. But let's just go into how they feel. I'll give you a perspective exercise. Let's just imagine you're at a gala ball. It's a cocktail party. All the men are wearing tuxedos, and the women are wearing beautiful cocktail dresses. All right, and in walks this guy. Now everyone turns around and has a look at this guy. Now, how would this guy feel that he didn't get the memo that this was the dress was formal, and he turns up to the party like this? That's the way men feel in the birth suite. That's actually how they relate to that kind of environment, because they're the one who knows the least in that room, and they're automatically tense. They're automatically kind of fearful because everyone's told them just how brutal and primal childbirth is, and they don't really know what to expect. And I like the kind of metaphor of this, in a sense, is that this gentleman is looking up to that bridge. Let's just imagine that's where his laboring partner is. She's balancing on a tightrope on that bridge, and he's really scared that she's going to fall off. But in fact, that bridge has stood since 1600. It's a really solid bridge, and he doesn't really get the idea that she's very well supported. He just thinks there's danger. That's what he sees. That first-time father sees danger, and he also didn't get the memo for the party. So that's a bit of perspective on what these guys really feel like. And when we talk about medicalisation, what does it deliver for dads? Well, the worldwide research that I've read and looked over for some years, these words that are on the right there are just drawn straight from research studies. Now, this isn't limited to first-time fathers, but the issue with men is that they bottle these feelings up. And there's nowhere really for guys to have a negative experience of birth. We're not allowed to talk about that. We can't talk about it to our friends because we don't have the language, the permission, the historical context, the ancestral kind of knowledge or freedom to do that. So it gets bottled up. And then when they walk away from that system, and if there has been any trauma, and this is what I experienced, if there has been any kind of, problem during the birth or the pregnancy, then they walk away saying, oh, is that the best you can do? And that's the system has just let me down. I feel disempowered by the system. No one looked after me when, actually immediately after the birth of my son, I wanted to speak to a counsellor, someone in the hospital, the social worker. And the midwife who was attending to us said to my partner, oh, we'll have to say it's for you, because the social worker wasn't allowed to come and have a listen to how I'd experienced birth. And that was really sad. But they did come around eventually, and we did have a chat, and I was able to release some more energy. But that was just an experience where I just thought, wow, I've just experienced a traumatic birth, and yet I'm not allowed to see someone have a sympathetic ear. Anyway, I digress. So what happens when all of these feelings are bottled up? Over time, this just turns into, this is the attitude of men after a little while. And, they're just walking around traumatized and angry, after birth, because no one's talking to them about it. Whenever they say, oh, well, actually, it was a little bit really tough, the first thing people will say is, yeah, well, just suck it up, mate, because, your partner had it a lot worse. And in fact, my partner didn't have it a lot worse. She was actually, she was out cold in a sense, and doesn't remember a lot of it. So anyway, so what are the social impacts of men carrying around this bottled up anxiety and trauma after birth? Well, I think there are a few. And there's a few, some issues around mental health. In Australia, there's 1 in 10 men will suffer some kind of diagnosable mental health issue after after birth directly related to it, and that 45% of Australian men don't think that that's possible. They don't think that postnatal depression is a thing for men. There's also a higher suicide rate than at any other time. There's a relationship breakdown, isolation for first-time dads, substance abuse, risky behaviour, and of course, unfortunately, domestic and family violence is sometimes at an increased risk in some communities. And now let's move to what we can do about it, because that, I think, is, that's the joy of what I do, trying to think and try and move into a space where we have solutions for what's coming. And I think we need to recognise, firstly, that our models of care, and from an outsider, I'm not, I've done like a lot of extensive research into this. I have postgraduate degrees, research degrees, and bachelor's. But I was an engineer for most of my life, and coming in from the outside and looking at this and just seeing the way that this system operates is it's actually, yeah. Anyway, I don't think it's helpful, definitely, and we can see that it's a crisis. And part of the reason is because we have a power disparity between two systems that don't really cross-pollinate. They're both seeking safe outcomes for people, but they're not currently following the evidence base, 12 to 20 years behind. And they don't talk to each other, as far as I know, in Australia at least, they don't. And there's no sharing of information. And from an outsider's perspective, that seems a bit wrong. And I think that in any other industry, any other kind of way that we would try to seek safe outcomes in human life, we'd recognize that we all have relevant information. We would share the data that we possess, and we would collaborate to solve the problem. And that doesn't seem to be happening. And that's just, it's mind-boggling. So we have the system, and then we have mothers. Mothers are standing in the middle, kind of thinking, well, this is what the system is providing me at the moment. So they've got their little, kind of like their little voice that's kind of going, oh, can you do better, please? And then we've got dads, and they're standing over here, and they don't even have a voice, but they're outside of the system. They're outside of this whole, they don't know what their role is. And I think that's one of the major problems that's going on. So men don't have a voice. They can't magnify their partner's voice because they don't understand the language and they haven't got permission. So engaging dads actually magnifies the consumer voice. If we can give dads an understanding that they belong in this area of life, then they're able to not only support the labouring mother, the pregnant person, but they can begin to demand more from the system, and that will magnify. It will magnify the consumer voice, and I think that's where real change can happen. And that's kind of the real focus of my work, is giving dads the perspective of that they do have a role. So let's talk about that. The theory of change of the PAPAEA Foundation is about taking men from a place of apprehension, where birth is mysterious and they might even have some kind of indifference, where they become a helpless witness and they impose fear, tension, and pain upon the labouring person. We need to take them to a place of love, to a place of willingness, confidence, knowledge, and skills, so that they can begin to provide meaningful and revolutionary support in this space. So in order to do that, the PAPAEA Foundation has been working hard to create resources particularly for first-time expectant fathers. We created the Connected Dads, Connected Communities resource, which is a collaboration with another charity here in Australia called the Fathering Project. And I got into a studio with a first-time father, and I just went through some of the resources that I have, and I spoke to him a little bit about what to expect, and we had a chat about what he was about to experience. And I also interviewed a lot of experts here in Australia, And I took the highlights from each of those interviews and I wove it into a 7-episode video product. Now, this is going to be free across the world. So when that comes up, like if you want to know about that, then obviously we can find a way to get that information to you. The next one that I developed is called the Birthing Dads program. Oh, incidentally, the Connected Dads, Connected Communities project, that goes for about an hour, and the Birthing Dads program goes for about 4 hours. And it involves the same people that I interviewed before, for the other one. So it doesn't cross over. It's got different aspects to it. But the Birthing Dads program is a paid program, and we use that to fund the charity. And so that's kind of like a social enterprise that we use to try and get the charity funded. And we talk about backing yourself, which is another way of we kind of talk about the evidence that shows that when men are deeply engaged in this process, they really do have positive outcomes. So it's about trying to help them know their value. We talk about perinatal hormones. We talk about building confidence. Now, building confidence not just in the father, but what kind of impact can the father have on building the confidence of his partner? Talk about pregnancy support, birth support, advocacy. We talk about advocating for a plan or the intentions of that birth, teaching men about strategies for being able to have those hard conversations with health professionals, which I think is where the best possible outcomes can occur. Because if we can teach men to be able to communicate in this space, then they're going to be able to not only do that in a dynamic sense, but when they leave, when they are speaking to their friend, they're out playing golf, they're having a game of tennis, they're out for a walk with one of their mates who's supporting a pregnant person, they can start to have real conversations about perinatal health. And I think that's where we need to get to. We need to get to a place where men are happy sharing their wisdom around perinatal health, which in fact at the moment that just doesn't occur, and I think that's unfortunate. We talk about bringing baby home and how to build attachment and postnatal depletion and what it's like to be in there and postnatally and managing their expectations around all of this. I talk about their relationships post-birth and how challenging that can be, and I teach them how to future-proof their relationships so that they can actually move through that time in a kind of more connected way. Then we've got the wheel of continuous support. So when I developed this resource, I was trying to think, well, how do you actually land this idea into men's heads that they're really important? Because you can talk to them about how important they are, but if you don't have any detail behind that statement, then you're actually they don't get it. And so I thought, well, if we can say, okay, well, everyone's got arms, everyone's got feet, everyone's got hands, everyone's got a heart, brain, eyes, ears. Well, how can we land that, and what can you do with those attributes that everyone, most men are able to bring to bear on this time of their lives? And so there's a lot of things. So let's just take it, their arms. What can they do with their arms? Well, during birth, they're able to hug, support, reposition if they're using active birth. They can use this is also symbolizes their strength and stamina to last the distance. And that might sound a little ludicrous, oh, dad's having to last the distance. But if you've got a long first birth, then he is going to need a little bit of mental toughness around, continuing to hold that position. He's going to be, in a little bit of pain in comparison, if he's going to have to, at times really dig deep as well. And post-birth, he can carry, cradle, or rock the baby. So it's trying to actually summarize that idea that they do have a role. And, so when a man turns around to me and says, oh yeah, but I don't have a role until the baby comes, I say, look, mate, you actually do. And here it is. So that's just to land, that idea that we have a role, because I think the misconception, the myth that men don't have a role is one of the things that we're trying to bust. That's a myth I'm trying to bust. And we also created in a leaflet kind of form. So this was developed with family interagency here in Australia. And this is just essentially just kind of saying, well, how can you work as a team, during pregnancy, working as a team during birth, and working as a team during post-birth. And look, these resources are universal, I believe. And, we're actually about to translate this into 6 languages, and they're available. If you contact me via preparefoundation@gmail.com, I can send you the print versions, and you can put them in your clinic or wherever they might be handy for you. So let's bring this to a close by kind of saying, well, men have been in the room for 50 years, but they haven't really been in the room at all. So let's really bring them into the room so they can start actually feeling like they're a part of this process. And they're an extra pair of hands. Why not put them to work? We have a midwife crisis here in Australia, and I tend to think that if we engage dads, down the track, the midwives will be able to just monitor a couple by just, kind of coming into the room. And if the dad can kind of say, well, it's all right, it's okay, I've got this, no problem, then she can go and help some other couple where the dad hasn't been through one of our courses. So let's make space for dad's inclusion, and they will have a revolutionary impact on maternal health. If we can give them a few small pointers about, not imposing themselves on the space, then it can be, the impact can be huge. We need to start encouraging the teamwork aspect of families, the birth of families. We need to help men understand that they are a relevant member of that team, and it will absolutely change the way that families are born, and I believe it will help families thrive into the future, and we'll be a lot better off because of it. So to finish with this image, this is the current impact that men are having. It's the tip of the iceberg, but men do want to have a much bigger impact in this space. They just need our help to understand, how to operate in this world, and the potential that they could have is absolutely huge, and we need to tip this iceberg on its head. Thank you. There's my incidentally, no, if you go to birthingdads.com.au and use and set up a profile, and use the code industry, that will give you free access to the Birthing Dads resource, and you can skip through it, have a look through it, look at the whole thing, do what you like, but just use the code industry for free access. Thanks. Over to you, John. Or should I see if there's any?
So I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A at the moment, Stephen, but perhaps I can pose a question to you in that case, and take the moderator prerogative. Could you talk a little bit about the way that either through the Prepare Foundation or through other work that you've done, kind of you and midwives, you and doulas have kind of worked together on the question of men and masculinity and supporting the birth process, and kind of what are the ways you feel that those sorts of conversations or webinars or kind of support that research you've seen from those communities has shaped the work that you and kind of your colleagues are doing?
Sorry, I don't really understand.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what have, like you learned from doulas and midwives that has shaped the work that you're doing?
Well, I meet with doulas and midwives a lot, just as part of my engagement, and I guess over time that it does rub off, and a lot of the research that I have read has been from the midwifery kind of community as well. And so I do think absolutely it has shaped my views. And I do yeah, I do subscribe to, I guess, the midwifery model of care, with some help from, from the medical side of things, if something goes wrong. Very good. Thanks, John. Okay, well, if there is no more questions, then I'm happy to end the session. If anyone has a question, then it would be great to hear from you.